The sun was setting over Willow Creek, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The small Midwestern town was quiet, just like it always was. Jake Thompson wiped his hands on a rag after finishing work on an old pickup truck outside his garage. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost time to head home. Lavra would be waiting for him with dinner, and he didn't want to keep her waiting. Jake wasn't a man who stood out in a crowd. He was average in every way. Average height, average looks, and an average life. But he took pride in what he did. Fixing things came naturally to him, whether it was cars, appliances, or even relationships. His wife, Laura, often joked that if there were a medal for being dependable, Jake would have won it years ago. That Laura Thompson was different from Jake in some ways, but similar in others. She taught third grade at the local elementary school and had a way of making everyone feel seen and heard. Her students adored her, and so did Jake. Life in Willow Creek suited them both. It was predictable, safe, and comfortable. But all of that changed one evening when the sky lit up in a way no one had ever seen before. Jake was locking up the garage when he noticed a strange glow overhead. At first, he thought it might be lightning or maybe a meteor shower. But as he looked closer, he realized it wasn't anything natural. A massive object descended silently from the heavens, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. It hovered above the town square, casting an eerie light over everything below. People poured out of their homes, pointing and shouting as they tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Some ran inside to grab their phones, while others stood frozen in awe. Jake felt his heart race as he watched the ship lower itself until it was just a few 100 feet above the ground. There was no sound, no sign of movement, just an overwhelming presence that made everyone feel small. Then, without warning, beams of light shot down from the ship. They moved quickly, targeting specific individuals scattered throughout the crowd. Jake barely had time to react before one of the beams engulfed him. Everything went white and then black. When Jake opened his eyes, he found himself lying on a cold, smooth surface. The air smelled metallic, and the lighting was soft yet unnatural. Around him, other people groaned as they woke up. He recognized a few faces immediately. Lavra was beside him, looking pale and frightened. Sam Carter, a gruff farmer known for his stubbornness, sat nearby rubbing his temples. Emily Dawson, a nurse from the hospital, was already on her feet, checking to see if anyone was hurt. And Alex Bennett, a college student who had come back to visit his parents, looked around wide-eyed and confused. "Where are we?" Laura whispered, clutching Jake's arm tightly. "I don't know," Jake replied, though he suspected the answer wasn't going to be comforting. Before anyone could say more, a voice filled the room, not through speakers, but directly in their minds. It spoke calmly, almost soothingly, though its words sent chills down their spines. "You have been selected for observation. Your actions will determine the outcome." No one knew how to respond. Questions raced through their heads, but none of them dared to speak aloud. What did the aliens mean by observation? Why had they been chosen? And most importantly, what would happen next? The group soon discovered that they weren't alone. More people from Willow Creek had been taken too. Some were calm, trying to rationalize the situation, while others panicked, screaming for help or demanding answers. Jake tried to stay focused, reminding himself that losing his cool wouldn't do anyone any good. He turned to Lavra and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "We'll figure this out," he said softly. "Just stick close to me." As the initial shock began to wear off, the group started to take stock of their surroundings. The room they were in was vast and featureless, except for a single doorway at the far end. Beyond it lay another chamber, this one filled with sleek, alien technology that defied explanation. Panels glowed faintly on the walls, and strange symbols floated in midair, shifting and rearranging themselves constantly. It became clear that the aliens weren't interested in communication, at least not in the traditional sense. Instead, they seemed intent on observing. Every move the humans made was tracked, every word they spoke analyzed. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being studied like lab rats, though he didn't understand why. Despite the fear and uncertainty, something remarkable began to happen. Slowly, the group started to bond. They shared stories about their lives back in Willow Creek, finding comfort in familiarity. Sam talked about his farm, describing the endless fields of corn and wheat. Emily spoke about her job at the hospital, where she cared for patients day in and day out. Even Alex opened up, admitting that he sometimes felt lost and unsure about his future. Through these conversations, they realized that despite their differences, they shared something important, a desire to survive. Whatever the aliens had planned, for them, they would face it together. As the hours passed, the group grew restless. No food or water had been provided, and the lack of sleep was starting to take its toll. Just when frustration began to boil over, the aliens introduced their first test. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a maze-like structure that stretched farther than the eye could see. Holographic projections flickered to life within the maze, showing images of terrifying creatures and dangerous obstacles. "You must navigate this path," the voice instructed. "Failure is not an option." Jake exchanged a glance with Lavra. Neither of them liked the sound of that, but there was no time to hesitate. Taking a deep breath, Jake stepped forward, motioning for the others to follow. Together, they entered the maze, unaware of the challenges and revelations that awaited them. This part ends here, setting the stage for the unfolding events and introducing the characters and their initial reactions to the alien encounter. The maze stretched endlessly before them, its walls shimmering faintly as if alive. Jake led the group cautiously, his eyes scanning every corner for signs of danger. Behind him, Lavra clutched his arm tightly, her breath quick and shallow. Sam Carter brought up the rear, muttering under his breath about how none of this made any sense. Emily Dawson stayed close to Alex Bennett, who looked like he might bolt at any moment. It didn't take long for the first challenge to appear. A low growl echoed through the narrow corridor, and a holographic projection of a massive wolf-like creature materialized in front of them. Its glowing red eyes locked onto the group, and it bared its teeth menacingly. Lavra gasped, stepping back instinctively, but Jake held his ground. "It's not real," Jake said firmly, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. "Just stay calm." The creature lunged forward, its jaws snapping inches from Jake's face. He flinched, but forced himself to remember what the aliens had implied earlier. They were being tested. If this thing could truly hurt them, why bother creating such elaborate illusions? Taking a deep breath, Jake stepped closer to the creature instead of running away. To everyone's surprise, the hologram flickered and vanished. "See?" Jake turned to the group with a small smile. "It's all in our heads." Sam rolled his eyes. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one stuck in some alien death trap." Despite his grumbling, the group pressed on, their confidence growing slightly after the encounter. But the maze was far from over. As they moved deeper into its twisting passages, the challenges became more complex and more personal. For Laura, it was a simulation of her classroom. The familiar desks and chalkboards surrounded her, but something was off. Her students sat, quietly, staring blankly ahead, their faces pale and lifeless. Suddenly, the room began to shake, and water started pouring in from the ceiling. Panic set in as she realized she couldn't save everyone. She had to choose between staying with her students or escaping through a narrow doorway that appeared behind her. Jake noticed Lara hesitating and rushed to her side. "Lavra, come on. This isn't real. It's trying to mess with your mind. Tears streamed down her face as she fought against the illusion. Finally, she clenched her fists and forced herself to turn away from the children. The classroom dissolved around her, leaving her trembling but determined. Alex faced a different kind of trial. His section of the maze transformed into a replica of his college campus. He found himself standing in front of a lecture hall filled with people laughing and pointing at him. A voice boomed from nowhere, listing every mistake he'd ever made: failed exams, missed opportunities, broken promises. Alex dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by shame and regret. Emily knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. You can't let it win. These aren't your thoughts. They're theirs. Fight back. With effort, Alex pushed himself to his feet and walked out of the room. The voices faded, replaced by silence. He nodded at Emily, gratitude shining in his eyes. Sam's test hit hard too. The maze shifted into a vision of his farm, engulfed in flames. His crops burned, his animals screamed, and everything he'd worked for turned to ash. He fell to his knees, shouting in anger and despair. Jake approached him cautiously, knowing better than to interrupt someone in the grip of raw emotion. You've got this, Sam, Jake said gently. This isn't your farm. It's just a trick. Sam took a shaky breath and stood up, brushing dirt off his jeans. Yeah, well, it felt real enough. As the group continued onward, they began to notice patterns in the tests. Each challenge exploited their deepest fears and insecurities, forcing them to confront parts of themselves they'd rather ignore. But there was another layer to it. They weren't just fighting the illusions. They were learning to rely on each other. When Emily encountered her own trial, she found herself trapped in a hospital ward. Patients called out for help, but no matter how fast she moved, she couldn't reach them in time. One by one, they faded away, leaving her alone in the empty room. For a moment, she froze, paralyzed by guilt and fear. Then she heard Jake's voice calling her name. Emily, we need you. Don't let it beat you. She blinked, shaking off the weight of the simulation. Stepping out of the room, she rejoined the group, her resolve stronger than before. By the time they reached the final stretch of the maze, the group was exhausted but united. They had faced their worst nightmares and survived, thanks in part to each other. The last obstacle was a towering wall blocking their path. At first glance, it seemed impossible to climb, but Jake spotted a series of handholds embedded in the surface. I'll go first, he said, gripping the lowest hold. If I can make it to the top, I'll pull you up. One by one, they scaled the wall, helping each other whenever someone slipped or faltered. When they finally reached the other side, they collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily. Ahead of them, a glowing portal marked the exit. Before they could step through, the disembodied voice returned. You have completed the initial phase. Your adaptability and cooperation are noted. Further trials await. Without warning, the group was whisked away to another part of the ship. The maze disappeared, replaced by a new environment, a stark white chamber with no visible exits. They exchanged wary glances, knowing the aliens weren't done with them, yet Jake broke the silence first. Whatever comes next, we stick together. That's how we got this far. The others nodded in agreement, though they still didn't understand why they had been chosen or what the aliens wanted from them. One thing was clear. They were stronger as a team than they were alone. This part focuses on the group navigating the maze and overcoming their individual fears while leaning on each other for support. It ends with a sense of unity and determination as they prepare for the next phase of testing. The white chamber felt colder than anything they had experienced so far. The group stood in silence, their eyes scanning the smooth walls for any sign of movement or change. Jake shifted his weight from one foot to the other, trying to stay alert. Laura hugged herself tightly, her fingers brushing against the thin fabric of her sweater. Sam leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, his usual gruff demeanor masking the unease he felt inside. Emily paced back and forth, her mind racing as she tried to anticipate what might come next. Alex sat on the floor, staring at his hands like they held answers he couldn't quite grasp. Then it happened. The room began to hum softly, a low vibration that seemed to seep into their bones. Before anyone could react, the group was enveloped in a blinding flash of light. When the brightness faded, they found themselves separated, each person standing alone in a different space, surrounded by environments tailored specifically to them. For Jake, the scene was eerily familiar. He stood in his garage, tools scattered around him, just like they always were after a long day's work. But something was wrong. The air smelled strange, metallic and sharp, and the tools on the shelves started to rust right before his eyes. One by one, the objects around him began to break down until the entire garage crumbled into dust. Then he saw Laura, or rather, an image of her standing in the distance, calling out for help. Her voice grew fainter the closer he got, and no matter how fast he ran, she slipped further away. Jake felt his chest tighten, panic rising in his throat. He stopped running and closed his eyes, forcing himself to think clearly. "This isn't real," he muttered under his breath. "It's another test." When he opened his eyes again, the illusion was gone. The empty void returned, and Jake let out a shaky breath. He wasn't sure how much more of this he could take, but he reminded himself that giving up wasn't an option. Not when Laura and the others were counting on him. Laura's trial was equally harrowing. She found herself back in her classroom. But this time, the children weren't silent. They screamed and cried, pleading for her to save them. The floor beneath her feet cracked, and water rushed in, rising rapidly. Laura tried to pull the kids toward higher ground, but her efforts were futile. Every time she reached for one, another would slip away. Despair threatened to overwhelm her, but then she remembered Jake's words. It's not real. Summoning every ounce of courage, she forced herself to step back and watch as the simulation dissolved around her. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't look away. She had faced her fear head-on, and that was enough. Sam's ordeal took him to his farm, where everything he loved was being destroyed. A violent storm raged overhead, tearing apart the barn and flooding the fields. His cattle stampeded in all directions, and the crops he had worked so hard to grow were reduced to mud. For a moment, Sam froze, overwhelmed by the sense of loss. Then anger surged through him, fueling his determination. "You think you can break me?" he shouted at the sky. "Go ahead and try." He grabbed a shovel lying nearby and started, digging a trench to redirect the floodwaters. It was pointless. The storm wasn't real, but the act of fighting back gave him strength. Slowly, the chaos around him faded, leaving him standing alone once more. Emily's test unfolded in a hospital ward eerily similar to the one she had faced earlier. This time, however, the patients weren't fading, they were accusing her. Voices echoed in her mind, blaming her for mistakes she hadn't made and decisions she hadn't chosen. Nurses and doctors appeared, shaking their heads in disappointment. Emily wanted to scream, to defend herself, but she knew arguing wouldn't help. Instead, she focused on the one thing she could control, her breathing. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. With each breath, the voices grew quieter until they vanished completely. When the room dissolved, Emily straightened her shoulders, feeling stronger than she had moments ago. Alex's challenge was perhaps the most personal. He found himself in a dark room filled with mirrors, each reflection showing a version of himself he hated. Some showed him failing exams, others depicted arguments with his family, and still others revealed moments of loneliness and doubt. Reflections taunted him, whispering cruel truths and exaggerated lies. Alex sank to his knees, covering his ears to block out the noise. But then, amidst the chaos, he heard Emily's voice in his mind. Fight back. Summoning every bit of willpower he possessed, Alex stood up and smashed his fist into the nearest mirror. The glass shattered, and with it, the illusions fell apart. He emerged from the test shaken but resolute. One by one, the group was reunited in the White Chamber. They looked at each other, their faces pale and drawn, but their spirits unbroken. No one spoke immediately. They simply stood there, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Finally, Jake broke the silence. We made it, he said quietly. Whatever they threw at us, we got through it. Lavra nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. But why are they doing this? What do they want from us? They're testing us, Emily replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Not just our strength or intelligence, but how we handle fear and failure. How we keep going even when everything seems hopeless. Sam snorted. Well, they picked the wrong bunch if they thought we'd crack easy. Alex managed a weak smile. Maybe that's the point. Maybe they wanted to see if we could stick together. Before anyone could respond, the chamber shifted again. The walls melted away, revealing a vast landscape that resembled Earth, but only superficially. The sky was too bright, the trees too tall, and the horizon stretched impossibly far. A holographic sun hung overhead, casting sharp shadows across the uneven terrain. The group exchanged wary glances before stepping forward, cautiously. Their new environment was unlike anything they had encountered before. Strange plants swayed in the breeze, releasing spores that glowed faintly in the dim light. Rivers of liquid metal twisted through the land, reflecting the distorted sky above. And everywhere they looked, they saw signs of danger rocks that shifted unexpectedly, vines that lashed out like whips, and creatures that lurked just out of sight. This is insane, Sam muttered, gripping a makeshift spear he had fashioned from a fallen branch. How are we supposed to survive here? We'll figure it out, Jake said firmly. Just like we did before. The first challenge came quickly. As they crossed a narrow bridge over one of the metallic rivers, the structure began to collapse beneath their feet. Jake acted without hesitation, grabbing Lavra and pulling her to safety, while Sam and Alex helped stabilize the planks. Emily used her quick thinking to anchor the bridge with nearby vines, allowing them to cross safely. By the time they reached solid ground, they were all breathing heavily, their nerves frayed but intact. The second challenge tested their resourcefulness. Hunger and thirst set in quickly, forcing them to scavenge for food and water. Emily identified edible plants based on their resemblance to Earth flora, while Alex discovered a stream hidden behind a cluster of glowing rocks. Jake and Sam worked together to build a shelter using materials they found scattered around the area. Lavra kept morale high, reminding everyone of the progress they had already made. Despite their growing camaraderie, tensions occasionally flared. Sam argued with Jake over leadership decisions, and Alex struggled to shake off lingering doubts about his usefulness to the group. But every time conflict arose, someone stepped in to mediate. Laura's calm demeanor often diffused heated exchanges, while Emily's logical approach helped refocus their energy on survival. The final challenge was the most daunting. A massive mechanical creature emerged from the horizon, its body covered in jagged plates and glowing circuits. Its eyes scanned the group coldly as it advanced, emitting a low mechanical hum that vibrated through the ground. Panic bubbled up in their chests, but Jake quickly took charge. "Stay close," he ordered. "We need to find its weak spot." Working together, they devised a plan. Sam distracted the creature by throwing rocks, drawing its attention away from the others. Emily and Alex analyzed its movements, identifying a vulnerable joint in its leg. Jake and Lavra worked in tandem, to disable the joint using a combination of brute force and clever leverage. After several tense minutes, the creature faltered and collapsed, its system shutting down with a loud hiss. Breathing heavily, the group gathered around the defeated machine. Exhaustion weighed heavily on their shoulders, but a sense of triumph burned brightly in their hearts. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, not because they were extraordinary, but because they had learned to rely on each other. As the alien voice returned, congratulating them on their success, the group exchanged knowing looks. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Their journey was far from over, but one thing was certain. They were no longer the same people who had entered the maze. They had been broken, tested, and rebuilt, and through it all, they had discovered the true meaning of unity. This part focuses on the group's individual trials and their ability to overcome personal fears before coming together to tackle a shared challenge in the alien-created wilderness. It emphasizes growth, teamwork, and resilience as they prepare for whatever lies ahead. The group stood in silence, staring at the lifeless hulk of the mechanical creature they had just defeated. Its jagged plates and glowing circuits no longer posed a threat, but the weight of what they had accomplished hung heavy in the air. Jake wiped sweat from his brow, his hands trembling slightly from exertion. Lavra leaned against him, her breathing still uneven after the adrenaline rush. Sam dropped the makeshift spear he had been holding, letting it clatter to the ground. Emily and Alex exchanged a glance, both too exhausted to speak. For a moment, none of them moved. The alien landscape stretched endlessly around them. Its strange beauty both awe-inspiring and unsettling. The glowing streams of liquid metal shimmered faintly in the distance, and the spore-filled plants swayed gently in the breeze. Despite their victory, the group couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. They had faced impossible challenges and survived, but the aliens' intentions remained unclear. Then the voice returned, resonating in their minds like a soft hum. Your actions have been noted. Cooperation and ingenuity are qualities worth observing. However, your final trial awaits. Before anyone could react, the ground beneath their feet began to shift. The terrain dissolved into light, and once again they found themselves transported to a new environment. This time, they were standing on a flat, featureless plain under a starless sky. The air was cool and still, and the only sound was the faint echo of their own breathing. In the distance, a massive structure loomed, a towering obelisk made of black stone that seemed to absorb the dim light around it. Jake stepped forward cautiously, his eyes fixed on the obelisk. What now? He muttered, more to himself than knowing. Anyone else? Laura followed close behind, her hand brushing against his arm. We've come this far. Whatever it is, we'll handle it. Sam crossed his arms, scowling. Yeah, well, I'm getting tired of these games. What do they want from us? Emily frowned, studying the obelisk carefully. Maybe this is the last one. If we can figure out what they're looking for, maybe we can end this. Alex nodded slowly, though his expression was uncertain. Let's just get it over with. As they approached the obelisk, they noticed something strange etched into its surface symbols that pulsed faintly with an inner light. The markings resembled nothing they had ever seen before, yet somehow they felt familiar, as if the patterns resonated deep within their minds. Jake reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing against the cold stone. The instant he made contact, a surge of energy coursed through him, and images flooded his mind. He saw flashes of humanity's history, the rise of civilizations, wars fought over land and ideology, discoveries that pushed the boundaries of knowledge, and moments of kindness that transcended differences. But alongside these glimpses of progress, he also saw destruction cities reduced to rubble, ecosystems collapsing, and people turning against each other in fear and greed. The visions overwhelmed him, and he stumbled back, gasping for air. "What happened?" Lavra asked, rushing to his side. "I don't know," Jake replied, shaking his head. "It was like they showed me everything, our best moments and our worst." One by one, the others touched the obelisk, experiencing similar visions. Each person saw different aspects of humanity's past and present, tailored to their own perspectives. Lavra witnessed scenes of education and mentorship, where teachers inspired generations of students, but she also saw classrooms abandoned due to conflict or neglect. Sam relived the struggles of farmers battling droughts and economic hardship, as well as the joy of harvests shared with communities. Emily saw medical breakthroughs saving lives, contrasted with hospitals overwhelmed by pandemics and inequality. Alex observed technological advancements connecting people across the globe, juxtaposed with the isolation caused by those same innovations. When everyone had stepped away from the obelisk, they gathered together, their expressions a mix of awe and confusion. The experience had left them shaken, forcing them to confront not only humanity's potential, but also its flaws. Jake spoke first, his voice low and steady. "They're showing us who we are, not just as individuals, but as a species." Laura nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "And they're asking us if we're worth saving." Sam clenched his fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Saving? We didn't ask for any of this. Why should we have to prove ourselves to them?" "Because they're watching," Emily said softly. "Not just us, but all of us. They're trying to decide if we deserve a chance." Alex looked down at his hands, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do we, though? After everything we've done? How can we even answer that?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. For the first time since their ordeal began, doubt crept into their minds. They had faced their fears, worked together, and proven their resilience. But the aliens' final test wasn't about survival. It was about judgment. It forced them to grapple with uncomfortable truths about humanity's capacity for both greatness and destruction. As they stood there, the obelisk began to change. As symbols on its surface shifted and rearranged themselves, forming new patterns that glowed brighter with each passing second. A doorway appeared at its base, leading into darkness. The voice returned, calm but firm. "Enter. Your decision will determine the outcome." Jake glanced at the others, his expression resolute. "We don't have a choice. Let's go." They walked through the doorway together, emerging into a chamber unlike anything they had encountered before. The room was vast and circular, its walls covered in screens displaying live footage of Earth. Cities bustled with activity, forests teemed with wildlife, oceans stretched endlessly, and deserts sprawled beneath blazing suns. But interspersed among these images were scenes of devastation-polluted rivers, barren wastelands, and smog-choked skies. The contrast was stark, a reminder of humanity's dual nature. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal upon which rested a single object, a small, crystalline sphere that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. A voice spoke again. "This artifact represents the culmination of your trials. Place your hands upon it, and your collective shall be measured." No one moved at first. The weight of the moment pressed down on them, heavier than anything they had faced before. Finally, Jake stepped forward, placing his hands on the sphere. One by one, the others joined him, their fingers overlapping as they formed a circle around the artifact. As they touched it, warmth spread through their bodies, and the screens around them flickered, displaying new images. They saw glimpses of possible futures, some hopeful, others bleak. In one vision, humanity united to heal the planet, building sustainable cities and restoring damaged ecosystems. In another, the visions deepened, leading to chaos and collapse. The images shifted rapidly, showing countless paths humanity could take, each shaped by choices yet to be made. The voice spoke. One final time. Your species stands at a crossroads. You possess the ability to create or destroy, to unite or divide. The choice is yours. With that, the chamber dissolved into light, and the group found themselves back in the white void where their journey had begun. The alien's presence was gone, leaving behind only silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. They simply stood there, absorbing everything they had experienced. Finally, Jake broke the silence. We did it. We made it through. Lavra smiled. Weakly, her hand still resting on his arm. But what happens now? Do you think they'll come back? I don't know, Jake admitted. But whatever they decide, we showed them something important. We showed them that we're capable of working together, even when things seem impossible. Sam let out a long sigh, running a hand through his hair. Guess we'll find out sooner or later. Emily nodded, her gaze thoughtful. Maybe this wasn't just about proving ourselves to them. Maybe it was about reminding ourselves of what we're capable of. Alex looked up, his expression determined. If they do come back, we'll be ready. As the group stood together, in the quiet void, they realized that their journey had changed them in ways they couldn't fully understand yet. They had faced their fears, confronted their flaws, and discovered the strength that came from unity. Whether the aliens returned or not, they carried with them a newfound sense of purpose and the hope that humanity might rise to meet its challenges. This part focuses on the group's final trial, which forces them to reflect on humanity's strengths and weaknesses. It ends with a sense of resolution and introspection, setting the stage for their return to Earth and the lingering uncertainty of the aliens' ultimate decision. The white void dissolved into nothingness, and the group found themselves standing in the middle of Willow Creek once again. The familiar sights, the quiet streets, the old oak trees, the small shops lining Main Street felt surreal after everything they had endured. Jake blinked against the sunlight, his eyes adjusting to the brightness. Lavra stood beside him, her hand still gripping his arm tightly, as if afraid he might disappear. Sam looked around with a frown, muttering under his breath about how none of it made sense. Emily and Alex exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of relief and disbelief. At first, it seemed like no time had passed at all. Cars drove by slowly, neighbors waved from their porches, and children played on the sidewalks. Nobody seemed to notice that anything unusual had happened. Jake checked his watch, surprised to see that it was the same evening they had been taken. Had they really spent hours or even days on board the alien ship? Or had time worked differently for them? Lavra broke the silence first. Do you think anyone noticed we were gone? Jake shook his head. I don't know. Maybe not. Either way, I'm not sure we should tell anyone what happened. Sam snorted. Yeah, because who'd believe us anyway? Aliens testing us? They'd lock us up in a psych ward before breakfast. Emily nodded thoughtfully. He's right. We don't owe anyone an explanation. Besides, this is ours now. Something only we understand. Alex stared at the ground, kicking a pebble absently. But what was the point? What did they want from us? No one had an answer. The aliens' final words echoed in their minds. Humanity stood at a crossroads, capable of both greatness and destruction. The group had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged stronger, but whether their efforts would influence the aliens' decision remained unknown. As they walked back toward their homes, each person carried the weight of the experience differently. Jake felt a renewed sense of responsibility, not just for his family, but for the community around him. He realized that while he couldn't control the future, he could make choices that mattered in the present. Lara, too, felt changed. Her encounter with the obelisk had shown her the power of education and mentorship, and she resolved to dedicate herself even more fully to her students, helping them see the best in themselves. Sam returned to his farm, where the field stretched wide and open under the setting sun. For years, he had worked alone, content in his solitude. But now, he found himself thinking about the others, how they had relied on each other during the trials. He decided to reach out more often, inviting neighbors over for coffee, or offering help when needed. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Emily went back to the hospital, where her patients greeted her with smiles and gratitude. She remembered the visions of medical breakthroughs saving lives and vowed to keep pushing herself to learn and grow. Every patient she treated became a reminder of why she had chosen her profession in the first place. Alex struggled the most to adjust. Back in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by familiar posters and books, he felt disconnected from the life he had known before. The aliens' tests had forced him to confront his insecurities and doubts, leaving him unsure of who he was supposed to be. But as the days passed, he began to see things differently. Maybe he didn't have all the answers yet, and maybe he never would. But he could take small steps forward, embracing uncertainty instead of fearing it. Despite their differences, the group stayed close. They met regularly at Jake's garage, Laura's kitchen table, or Sam's barn to talk about what they had experienced. Sometimes the conversations were lighthearted, filled with jokes about how ridiculous the whole thing sounded. Other times they delved deeper, discussing the lessons they had learned and the questions that lingered in their minds. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Jake spoke up. "Do you ever wonder if they'll come back?" Laura rested her head on his shoulder. "Maybe, or maybe they've already decided." Sam shrugged. "Either way, it doesn't matter. We did what we could." Emily smiled softly. "And we're better for it, stronger." Alex nodded, looking up at the night sky. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." They fell silent then, gazing at the constellations above. The vastness of space reminded them of how small they were in the grand scheme of things, but also how significant. Humanity might be flawed, full of contradictions and imperfections, but it was also capable of incredible resilience and growth. That was the message the aliens had left them with, whether intentionally or not. Weeks turned into months, and life in Willow Creek returned to its usual rhythm. People went about their routines, unaware of the extraordinary events that had unfolded among them. Yet those who had been tested carried the memory with them always, shaping their actions and decisions in subtle ways. Then, one clear night, something happened that sent chills down their spines. As they gathered outside Jake's garage, staring up at the stars, a faint light appeared in the distance. It grew brighter, moving steadily closer until it hovered directly above the town. The object shimmered like liquid metal, its surface reflecting the moonlight. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Jake stepped forward, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "If they've come back, we'll be ready." The light lingered for several minutes before vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. The group exchanged glances, their hearts pounding. There was no message, no sign of communication. Just the lingering question of whether they had passed the test, or if the trial was far from over. In the days that followed, they continued living their lives, carrying the knowledge that humanity's fate might rest in hands beyond their own. But they also knew something else. Whatever the future held, they had faced it once before. And if called upon again, they would rise to the challenge not as individuals, but as a team bound by shared experiences and unshakable determination. Underneath the endless expanse of stars, they found comfort in knowing that even in the face of the unknown, they weren't alone. This part wraps up the story by bringing the characters back to Earth and exploring how their experiences have changed them. It leaves room for ambiguity regarding the aliens' ultimate decision while emphasizing a personal growth and unity they gained through their journey.